Net Wealth Investments Limited is licensed to provide general advice. Our podcasts are not tailored to any one financial situation and may contain views of our presenters which may not align with Net Wealth's. The guests' organisation and Net Wealth have an arrangement for their financial products to be available for investment through the Net Wealth platforms, and Net Wealth may receive fees from the guest. More information about Net Wealth can be found on our website, including our financial services guide and disclosure documents. Please seek professional advice before acting.
So we have a very, very strong footprint around about the 12% mark of the professional advisors in the industry today.
I think we can probably do a little bit of work as advisors and advice firms to just sort of simplify things and take a step back, unpack it all.
You have these family office principals. Every generation, eventually, the principal changes.
The operations role is much more tactical as opposed to somebody who can handle and ensure really the execution of the firm's growth strategy.
Hi, and welcome to Between Meetings with Matt Heiner. In this podcast series, NetWealth's CEO and Managing Director chats to industry leaders and innovators with local and global expertise. They discuss the latest technologies, business models, and demographic changes, as well as leadership lessons and trends that are impacting financial services. We hope you enjoy their unique insights.
As we look back on 2025, this episode highlights some of the most thought-provoking moments from our conversations. You'll hear Matt Heiner, CEO and Managing Director of NetWealth, in conversation with leading voices in the industry, who share their perspectives, learnings, and guidance for advisors navigating what's next. Brent and Justin Joffe, co-founders of Flux Finance, explain how Flux is helping advisors solve one of the industry's toughest challenges, engaging the next generation in a way that's scalable, cost-effective, and genuinely relationship building, rather than one-off or resource-heavy.
400 plus thousand people in the community, I think over now 80,000 app users, looking to build up that premium base. Where we're also really excited and focused at the moment is delivering what you've been able to do to the direct consumer into the advice industry and looking at B2B partnerships with advice firms. What are you doing in the space?
So for our first, 3 years or so, we were very much focused on the consumer and building our community for young adults in Australia. But over the last 2 years, a lot of financial advisors and planners and wealth firms as well started to learn about the impact that Flux was having on the next generation. And so over the last couple of years, we've been learning a lot about this space, and we've come to learn that over 60% of emerging affluent or young professionals here in Australia actually don't receive any education or advice today. And so this represents a really huge commercial opportunity, about or more than $2 trillion here in Australia at the least. And so today we are able to provide solutions to advisors and planners when it comes to building and establishing relationships with the next generation. And so something that Justin, Gus and I think about all the time is how can we help advisors to build those relationships in a scalable and cost-effective way?
And advisors are really struggling with how do we engage with the kids of our clients. And the stats are actually quite terrifying when you look at the number of next generation clients that actually leave their parents' advisor because there was no engagement or no relationship there. So we've seen firms starting to try and create their own content, articles, microsites. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, it's falling a little bit flat in many cases. It takes a big time commitment and they're only really scratching the surface. And are you seeing similar things out in the industry and having similar conversations?
Definitely. So been privileged to speak to a lot of advice firms and planners over the last couple of years. And one theme that is definitely emerging is that it's a very scary moment when wealth is passed from the current generation to the next generation, because what often happens is the next generation thinks, I don't need that advisor, or I don't trust him or her as much as my parents did or my grandparents did. And so I'm going to give it to my friend. I'm going to manage it myself. And that's a really scary thing. And so one of the key value propositions that Flux addresses for advisors is helping to really form that relationship and build upon that relationship with the next generation. Another thing that we help advisors do is if you're an advisor that wants to build your presence and your reputation with the emerging affluent or the next generation, that's another thing that Flux does. And Matt, you mentioned that some firms are trying to address this problem already privately in their own way, whether it's an education program or they're doing seminars and that sort of thing. Well, Flux really helps with that too. So we assist if you're trying to build engagement and audience size, if you're trying to deliver engaging content as well. We really address all three of those problems for advisors in an effective and hopefully a very scalable way as well.
And speaking to a lot of advisors, we know they all recognize there's a really important piece of work to do with the next generation, but they're also super busy all the time. And so the challenge for them is building this new skill set around content and how to engage this generation. We're already speaking to the next gen of their clients. And so for us, this is our bread and butter. And that's why so many advisors have turned to Flux already to look at scaling this for them. And we're continuing to see really great impact in the advisor space as well.
Next, Clayton Daniel, ex-CEO of Ensemble, shares how Ensemble is using community insight, data, and AI to turn the voice of advisors into something tangible, helping shape better products, smarter outcomes, and a more responsive advice ecosystem.
A key element of the product features that we wanted to build was an insight tool for the product side of the market. The way that we've always thought of ourselves is the profession is on one hand, the product is on the other. Collectively, it's known as the industry, and we see ourselves as a conduit between both. And we wanted to take, I guess, the thoughts and the opinions and the problems of advisors and turn that into a market intelligence tool would, I guess, be the closest thing that I could articulate it. At that stage, it was called XY Pulse, and it was definitely ahead of its time. The technology wasn't there to help facilitate it, so a lot of it was rather rudimentary. What that did, though, is it strangely set us up really early adoption of third generation AI. Went down a path to build a tool that we called XY Pulse. That didn't really have a commercial outcome. However, the infrastructure that we built, although it was completely rebuilt, but the initial infrastructure was set up so that we ended up building, strangely, one of the world's first third generation AI applications. This is like 6 months prior to the release of ChatGPT. We had documentation sort of integration into third gen OpenAI, and we had this tool that we were using internally. And that really sculpted up the next 3 years to the point that, we've just launched a CPD tool now that has AI built into it. We don't do this in every area, but it's allowed us to kind of bat outside of our league in at least one area.
So AI is obviously a hot topic at the moment, and interesting you're referring to it as third generation. I think, Gen AI is obviously coming over the top, and now we've moved on to agentic AI, and no doubt next week it'll be something completely different again. But how are you using AI in the business? It's easy to sort of throw the term out there, but what is it practically doing for you and the business and your customers?
We're really big adopters of AI to the extent that I would imagine by the end of this calendar year that we will have weekly training to do with even further adoption of it. I see a situation in the pretty short term, I would say by the end of this calendar year, where every person is going to start to multiply. I think we're going to move into a situation where, weekly training on how to leverage AI internally is going to become a pretty big focus. But in terms of the day to day, I rarely Google anymore. Everything is either done on ChatGPT, and that's just sort of me at a personal level. But the company operates very closely with AI in the sense that all the conversations that are on the Q&A application are all run through AI. They're allocated a topic, and ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to collectivize the conversations that advisors are having so that the needs and the wants of advisors eventually do turn up into boardrooms like yours. So we believe a concept which is, advisor problems driving product efficiencies and product outcomes. And because if a product is better designed along the lines of the needs of their clients, the advisor themselves is asking for those improvements so that they can better serve the client themselves. So we're constantly getting closer and closer to that sort of holy grail of the voice of the advisor being the thing that shapes the entire industry.
In this next moment, Andrea Inwood, Global CEO of Core Data, unpacks how financial services influence human well-being and why combining advice, operational discipline, and technology is essential as the largest intergenerational wealth transfer unfolds.
What's keeping you interested at the moment? What are the things that you're sort of thinking about and passionate about?
So for those of you who don't know Core Data, I'm actually passionate about financial services, and that sounds a little bit boring and in some ways embarrassing, to be perfectly frank. But the bit that I'm really interested about is how this affects humans. For year after year after year, we do a lot of research on how the financial services world interacts with the human parts of it, because while it is mundane and boring and trivial and important at the same time, there's so much data that we have and that so many people around the world have, which shows that paying attention to this part of your life, the financial services part of your life, adds a lot to your happiness and your outcome. In fact, we've got a couple of guys working within Core Data at the moment who almost finished a really exciting piece of research which shows how important that effect is. For a long time, since the 1970s, The Economist magazine, better than others, produced a piece of research that financial planners are important, but they do work that they don't think they do, which is do record keeping and management and planning and allowing people to map forward. So we've kind of modeled that time after time, but the data is coming out that it is now as important, if not more important, than actually owning a home, but in terms of how people see their future and in terms of actually making people wealthy, just concentrating on that. And the researchers kind of worked that out and said, well, it turns out it's a bit like seeing a GP. It turns out if you pay attention to your health, if you don't eat too much, you exercise regularly and eat the right foods, you stay healthy. And the same is true about financial services. The bit that everyone forgets is that there's two elements to this. There's the cognitive part, which the financial planners do for most people, which helps them to kind of deal with the load of thinking about the future, because that's really challenging to most humans. And then there's the organizational, operational part, which is the bit that NetWealth does, which takes that work and allows you to do it at scale without turning your whole life into a giant spreadsheet. So adding those two things together is really important. Now, why is that important at the moment? One is the biggest wealth transfer we've ever seen, 4.9 billion moving through the pipe. That's easy to see. It's probably as much as 10 billion more because the government doesn't count housing in that. And of course, that's got to change state and form. The next part of that is that the people moving into the savings program now haven't got the same benefits as the baby boomers. The property has become very expensive. You can trace that all the way back to the Howard and Keating reforms when they floated the dollar, and that meant that assets become incredibly valuable. You can have as much history as you like, but that dream hasn't moved off in Australia. So people do want to save, they do want to get wealthier, and they do want to move ahead. There's a really big inheritance bias in Australia, which is unusual in most countries. So people do want to leave money to their children and their grandchildren. And there's also a really big bias towards home ownership and a bias to kind of a comfortable lifestyle. So understanding that means that financial planning and financial advice and the kind of subsidiary services that, like the things that NetWealth provide, become really important. Here's the challenge though. It's really, really poorly done in Australia. And we're seeing lots of examples of that at the moment. I'm not going to go into them because it feels pretty tough to say, let's call out these people for the mistakes that they're making, though Matt and I just had a long conversation about it before. But we can see that happening, and we think, how is this possible that we've got to this point? How are we surprised by the intergenerational wealth transfer? How are we surprised by the fact that people can't get a step? How are we surprised by the fact that people are going to need to concentrate on? Yet that's what's happening. So that's got me very excited. It's got me very excited globally.
Now we hear from Dan Solon, president at Solon Strategic, who looks ahead to what advice could become. He unpacks why AI and avatars aren't optional future experiments, but powerful tools already reshaping how advisors scale, personalize, and engage.
I know that you're a big advocate for AI and some of the work that it can now do for advisors. Love to hear where you see it going and how you see it being best used by firms.
So first, I think advisors are largely in denial about AI and the impact it's going to have on the advisory business. I think personally, I don't know what the impact's going to be, but I know it's going to be seismic. I spend a lot of time studying and writing about AI. We do a lot of consulting on AI. What we're currently doing for our clients, and I'll just give you one example of how you can use AI in a way that very few advisors are currently using it. We create avatars using platforms like HeyGen or Synthesia. We create human avatars. We create voice avatars. So say you've written a book. We have that example of an advisor came to us. They've written a book, create an avatar for them, feed the book into AI, the entire manuscript. It generates hundreds and hundreds of transcripts. We take the transcripts, use another program, generate hundreds of videos, take our social media marketing team, deploy hundreds of videos over a period of time on his social media. Most advisors are still reading stuff like write content and hope you get likes. Okay, well, they're not going to be able to compete with our clients. our clients are scaling in a way that they couldn't dream of doing before at a very low price. I mean, the technology is so good that the next step is going to be agentic avatars, without a doubt. We're working on a really exciting project I haven't brought to fruition, but where we can take you, Matt, create an avatar of you, have you on your website 24/7. Using a large language model, we can have everything you've ever written and basic investing principles in the large language model. Clients can access you anytime they want, ask any questions in an interactive way. You give answers. They'll set up appointments with you, get you all booked. You don't touch anything. It's just a 24/7 lead generation machine. And then the step after that is going to be clients interact with that avatar. The avatar has all the information about the client in its database. And the client says, Dan, I see that you're out of whack with your asset allocation. Would you like me to rebalance? You say yes. And it says, great, I just did that. Or the avatar, which has the whole tax code in its database, says, I monitor the tax code not twice a year, but minute by minute. If we did this and moved some assets from one place to another, we could save you a lot of money. Would you like me to do that? There are a lot of regulatory, ethical issues surrounding this, but that's where we're going in a nutshell. But it's not just where we're going, it's where we are. I mean, there's a lot that can be done now, and advisors who haven't started are going to be way behind.
In our 100th episode, NetWealth's founder, Michael Heiner, reflects on one of the hardest lessons in business, recognizing when past success is no longer enough, and having the courage to change direction before the future passes you by.
Some people listening to this podcast would have a bit of an idea of the background to not only NetWealth, but also to the family history. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to hear it from you. And without going all the way back, I'd love just to hear a little bit about, I guess, the lessons from history and what you've learned from your father. And then we can talk a bit about NetWealth.
That's a brave question, Matt, because, when I get asked that question, I can go on for hours. So I hope the tape that we're using's got plenty of length in it. It's a fascinating history and a fascinating story. It's gone through ups and downs along the way, and we've ended up in this fabulous place that we are today. My father and my mother were both German citizens, both Jewish, living in Germany. And of course, with the rise of Nazism, that was a major problem. My father was in England at the time of the outbreak of war, and he was arrested as an enemy alien and sent to Australia on a infamous ship, prisoner of war ship called the Dunera, together with many other people that became well known, well respected, and in many cases famous. Once he got here, there was a bit of an outcry. It was eventually determined that being Jewish, he was actually on the Australians and British side. He was given the opportunity to join the Australian Army, which he did. When he was demobbed at the end of the war, he went back to the trade which he knew, which was trading. And whilst in Germany, it was a textile trading company throughout all of Europe. In Australia, he started to trade the goods that he could, wartime surplus goods, whether it was the wool off the barbed wire fence or canned goods out of the Sunraysia area, and started to build up a trading business exporting goods from Australia all over the world. That grew into what became Australia's largest trading company. And 46 years ago, when Matt was not quite conceived yet, we were doing about $500 million worth of exports for BHP steel alone to places like South America, to Eastern Europe during the communist days, to Western Europe, to Japan. He was very creative. He was dedicated to building up trade for Australia and developing Australian goods and commodities all around the world. We traded in wool and wheat and steel products, food products, a whole range of different products. One of the reasons that he was very successful was that Australia was a very insular country, didn't travel very much. The currency was pegged and the Reserve Bank would set the rate every day, not like it is now, a floating dollar. Australians didn't really have the expertise to trade overseas in foreign currencies, in foreign credit, providing credit to bankrupt countries like North Korea and North Vietnam as it was at that time. And so that provided us a real opportunity to dominate in the areas that we did. Over time, though, the Australian dollar was floated. Australian companies like BHP started to travel more and become more part of the world. And so the role of the trading company really started to diminish, and our competitors, such as the Japanese trading companies, purchased the means of production. So they owned the mines, they owned the steelworks and so on, which was not something that we were going to do. The lesson from that really is that we didn't look at our business early enough and strategically enough to say, the world is changing. Where are we going to go? How do we deal with this changing world? We should have looked at our business and made more strategic decisions about what to do, rather than letting the trading business slowly wither and constantly cut expenses to meet the declining income. So that's one of my key lessons, I think, for all businesses, is look at your business. Does it have a future? Does it have a growth potential? Or is it stagnating and going backwards? Many family companies fall for this, and they just feel, this is what my father did, this is what my grandfather did, I've got to keep going, trying to make a success of it. No, my father would have been very disappointed if we hadn't changed direction and created something much more successful.
Imagine a world where wealth technology is simplified. NetWealth is continually investing in new tools and platform features to optimize your staff productivity and to give you and your clients the best user experience. With our managed accounts functionality, bring new efficiency and scale to your investment operations. A world of technology awaits. Discover it at netwealth.com.au/woo.
Now, Con Costas, Managing Director of the Principles Community, shares his insights on the human side of change, how trust, open communication, and stronger leadership help teams navigate both tough messages and hypergrowth.
Thinking about the different places that you've worked, you've run and been involved in some really big institutions and really big establishment and well-known brands. And you've also had to navigate your way through a lot of change. You've had to communicate a lot of change. And I imagine change management was probably almost your 9-to-5 job for many, many years there. So, what were some of the really big lessons that you learned throughout that period, particularly as it relates to change?
I think the ability to be transparent and really have trusted relationships with your people and having open communication, however bad, good or indifferent it is, you've just got to be open and honest and be able to deliver the message as it has to be delivered. I think everyone respects hearing it firsthand. Everyone respects that communication piece, regardless of the messaging. But if you've got those trusted relationships, people will, of course, they're not going to feel great when you're delivering a bad message, but they respect that you've delivered it in a way that, open and honest. And that's how I operate. That's how I enjoy working with all of my people throughout my whole career.
Often that change, though, was actually about growth and sort of hyperscaling, if you like, whether it was in the licensee land or with BT Open and some pretty innovative business models for the time. How did you sort of change between sort of that change management, maybe when it wasn't such a good message, but also when you're trying to really take the team along with you and get them excited about that hypergrowth?
Yeah, I think the hypergrowth is probably my favourite part of the engaging with people and just driving activity, driving the excitement within why we're doing what we do and how we can actually all leverage and all benefit from growth is, again, it's that change management. It's having those discussions. It's knowing your people. It's being able to have a narrative that enables people to accept and understand why growth is so important for them, for their clients, and for the organisation overall, and just taking them on the journey. I suppose the easiest way that I had it was always lead from the front. If you're leading from the front and showing the way of how they can actually follow and grow, it just makes it so much easier when you've got a leader there that can actually lead.
Danny Legrand, head of IFA Consulting at Finura Group, cuts through the noise to explain where AI is generally adding value today and where advice firms need to slow down and get the basics right.
Probably a good segue into AI. Is this something that you're getting excited about? Have you seen some failures, and what are the areas that you think it's going to add the most value?
one of my colleagues would probably say that I'm a bit conservative on AI. And the reason that I am, I think, again, in advice, we got really excited about AI. So, when it first came out a couple of years ago, we all started talking about it. It was going to solve all of our problems. It was going to reduce SOAs down to 2 minutes. It was going to do all these amazing things. So those promises are fabulous, but, we're 2 years down the track and I don't think we've seen a lot of that happen. And I think that the reason is that, again, we haven't really strategically thought about where it fits, or we haven't really understood what those pain points are in our advice business and across that advice journey. We haven't really talked to our back offices and found out their take on things. So until we do that, I'm not sure that AI is going to be overly effective, and it just turns into a personal productivity tool, which, by the way, I use AI quite a bit in my job. I think it's wonderful. But I think, in terms of how it fits into that advice journey, and where you can, the practical application across a team of people in an advice firm, obviously file noting makes the biggest sense there. That's absolutely a bottleneck. And I think we've seen a lot of advice firms see the benefits of recording meetings, getting your file note transcripted really well, getting that follow-up with your client done really quickly, and then passing that on into advice. That is a no-brainer. And I think everybody should, at least at a minimum, have Copilot switched on and be recording all their Teams meetings, in my humble opinion. But I think for all of the other tools that are out there, I think we just need to wait and see. We need to test their safety and their viability. Again, we're working with highly sensitive data. We want to make sure that we're really handling that very well when it comes to using these AI tools. We don't want to be putting sensitive information into ChatGPT and personal identifiers and all that sort of thing. I'm not sure that we're not doing that right now. So before the train leaves, I think we probably just need to just take a bit of a step, just think really carefully about where this fits. Research and strategy, and I think kicking the ball around on those sort of things, marketing, get ChatGPT to help you with your LinkedIn posts and all that sort of stuff. I think that's really handy for those sort of things. So I love AI, use it personally myself, but I think from an advice firm perspective and looking at it, holistically about where it can fit, I think we just need to be careful. But I would say everybody should be recording their Teams meetings and getting their file notes done. You're going to see a significant uplift in efficiency just from doing that.
In this next moment, Michael Goodman, president of Greenspring Advisors, unpacks how culture became one of the most powerful growth levers in building a multi-billion-dollar advice firm.
I know something you're keen to talk about. The feedback has been, I think, that you have an outstanding culture, and that really is one of the things that differentiates you from many other firms. 22 staff. Love to hear how you've grown that team, what sort of retention mechanisms, how you actually find that next generation of advisor as well.
Yeah. So once again, I'm happy to share and I'll tell you everything about it, but I don't think it's anything magical. I think that what happened is when I hit 100 million in AUM, I said, okay, I took a deep breath because I started at zero and I started the business on my own. I didn't work for another firm per se. So I got to that point. I said, okay, I'm going to make it now. I'm going to be able to pay my bills. I'll make a decent living. Hopefully I'll, be able to retire one day. And what got me to this point is not going to get me where I want to go, or at least the next 100 million at least. So I hired a consultant and we sat down for the day. And one of the big things that came out of that was, what do you want your firm to look like? What are the clients you want to have, et cetera? And every time we went through this list and kind of culled it in different ways, coming to the top of the list was, I want the environment that I work in to be a good environment, a positive environment. I love to say fun, but work's not always fun. So I don't want to patronize everybody, but I wanted it to be an environment that people wanted to work in. And I've always thought about it that way. That's probably the result, once again, of, some bad experiences as an employee in some other places and not feeling like I was respected or treated well or compensated well. So I always try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I remember hearing, I don't remember where or who said this, but, a lot of bosses, but by the way, boss spelled backwards is double S-O-B. So, that's something to consider right there. But a lot of bosses, when employees come in, they close the door and they, shut the door and, they don't lock it, but they shut the door, right? And they keep them inside and they want them to work as much as they can. Somebody once said to me early on, you want to swing the door open. You want people to be able to be free, expand, go out, learn, develop their careers, get credentials, do these kinds of things and support them in their career. Hopefully that support leads them to better places down the line in your own organization. But you know what? If it brings them to something that you can't solve in your company, well, then that's okay. Wish them well, They'll do great. It's okay. It's fine. And I've always had that attitude about treating people that way and trying to make work, as great of a place it could be to work. And it's like, I didn't do it because I thought it would make me successful. I did it because I wanted to be happy myself. And it's turned out to, be a great result, not only for the obvious reasons, but it's also been great for economic reasons.
In this part of the episode, Alex Zachariah, co-founder and CEO of Linktree, explains why real AI transformation isn't about adding new tools, but fundamentally rewiring how a business operates, so teams can move faster, focus on craft, and scale with confidence.
I know you're very fond of AI, so you use it all day, every day for pretty much everything about your daily task and the way that you operate. But you're also pretty passionate about rewiring your business for the future, and I think you call it the AI factory. Love just to get some thoughts on where you see the world heading, but more importantly, how you actually get the business ready for it.
There's a lot of businesses, especially kind of like tech, SaaS startups, or any kind of tech business, or any business really, but I'm thinking specifically around like tech and SaaS that existed or already had a lot of scale ahead of ChatGPT coming out and really the proliferation of AI. If you look at the thousands of AI startups starting every week here in San Francisco alone, they're capable of building what a 300-person company is doing with 5 people pretty quickly and getting to significant revenue scale overnight. And so I really kind of stepped back and said, okay, if I were building a competitor to Linktree today from scratch in an AI native way, what would I be doing? How would I be building this organization? And it's kind of like it's a very real possibility, right? Like someone could kind of try and do that. And so we need to make sure that we're always at the forefront of adopting the AI tooling, adopting the ways that we can build, not being stuck in our ways. And so that's been a really fascinating process. I think generally people within the organization, there's some that are like mavericks and are really excited about it and they're going to go find their own ways to use AI. And then there's some, rightfully, I totally get it, where they've been afraid of it, a little bit worried about it, unsure how to operate with it. Probably a little bit of a challenge to your identity when you've trained to be a designer for 5 years or trained to be a PM for 5 years and you're starting to get your job and you're kind of like, but where do I live in this world? And I think that's really the approach we've taken of all right, this is a must. This is absolutely, we've delivered to our team that promotions, to get a promotion, you need to be demonstrating your use of AI or at least at a very minimum, your curiosity of how you can better yourself, your team, the company through utilizing AI. And there's a whole bunch of tactical process changes that we've introduced, which we can go through if you like. But really, it's this is happening. We must adopt being able to scale faster, build faster with AI. But hey, we're here for you and we're going to do this together. And anyone that tells you what good looks like or anyone tells you exactly how this is done is talking nonsense. No one knows. And actually, that's the opportunity for you. You get the opportunity to set the tone, set the pace, set the metrics for what makes sense. We're just expecting that you're doing it and that you're giving it a go. And so what that looks like is we give you access to every tool possible. We pay for your tokens. We pay for everything for you to go experience it. We give you time off. We give you entire days, entire weeks to just go experiment and play with it and find ways for you to work. We put together a whole Notion database and assets and prompt libraries and access to resources. We're doing weekly lunch and learns. We do every week as part of our demo power hour where we're demoing product. It's now about demoing as well. It's demoing things we've built, agents we've built internally to help us build. And we're hiring a head of AI ops, which is someone basically dedicated to helping us scale our own agentic operations, go work with individual teams through the lens of teaching them to fish, right? Teach them how to build their own agents, teach them how to build their own scaled operations. And the reason why I say rewiring the factory is I kind of likened it to electricity. When electricity comes along, you've got all these factories working on steam and water. And there were some factories that were all right, we're going to just put a light bulb in, I guess, don't really, whatever is this electricity thing. And there's some factories that went in, just completely rewired the factory floor to enable the use of electricity. And I think that's very similar to how we're thinking about it, which is yes, we could just use ChatGPT, or we can really foundationally rewire the way our systems and processes work such that the use of these AI tools we're actually getting efficiency out of it. And that it should never be seen as replacement of humans or reducing our team. It should just be about empowering our team. How do they all just do more? How do they get rid of the admin work? Like, how do you get rid of the work of doing work? Outside of engineering, that's mostly what it's doing. It's just like getting rid of the stuff you like don't like doing. And so, like, how do you scale that up so that we're calling it time on craft? Like, how do we improve your time on craft, that you're doing what you're hired to do and not the work of the work? And then in engineering, giving you every opportunity to, like, you can just build things so much faster. And we don't want engineers sitting there just being like agent controllers. There's still so much that you need your engineering skill set for, but you can do so much more. And so how do we facilitate and build up our technology stack so that that can happen? We're relatively far along the journey, still got a lot to do, but we're already seeing like just incredible gains in our ability to deliver and our velocity.
Now, Eliza DiPardo, the founder of DiPardo Consulting, outlines why the next growth curve in advice will be defined by strategic focus, modern marketing, and faster adoption of technology.
I think what's been quite interesting, particularly during the last couple of podcasts I've done with American firms, is that if you take away the noise and the industry and maybe the regulation, the challenges and the opportunities that firms both locally and over in the US are very similar. And there's a lot of commonality between the successful firms in both places. I'd love to understand from you what you see as some of the key ingredients of success for the best firms that you've worked with in the US.
Look, I think there are a number of different things that the better firms are focusing on. Generally, what I find is that the more strategic they are in terms of their own thinking and their ability to be very clear on what they're trying to accomplish, how they'll differentiate, how they will grow, and having the leadership within the business that's really laser focused on executing it, that is always a differentiator. And, you know, you meet all sorts of entrepreneurs over the years. Some of them are just very, very good at the strategic stuff. Others are much better just at the sales stuff. Everyone's got their own strength. But I do tend to find like those businesses that are really just laser focused, that they know exactly how they're going to stake a claim in the market, and they align their resources to be able to pursue their leading strategy, they're going to be really effective, right, in making the very most of the resources that they have available to them. I do come across businesses who are just, as I mentioned, like all about the sales and just very, very strong in that area and great at marketing. And I think that will be a key differentiator going forward. I really do believe both the combination of, what is the onslaught of AI tools combined with marketing channels will be a key differentiator in terms of the way that firms are able to grow. I do think we're going to see more accelerated client growth rates for those firms that can really better harness or more rapidly adopt AI, more rapidly adopt new marketing channels. I think we'll see record levels of client acquisition over the years ahead relative to what we've seen as an industry historically.
And that's, I guess, one of the observations, that you've got these incredibly large firms over in the US, and, they talk about the size of their businesses, and they're all, inevitably well north of $1 billion of AUM or even more, and yet they don't seem to have a lot of staff. Is that a reflection of the fact that they're just running their businesses much better, that the clients are much bigger? And is that a fair observation?
I don't know if it's fair to say that they don't have a lot of staff, although I do think what will happen over the next 5 years is we'll see a reshaping of organizational structures just by virtue of being able to move much more of the lower value work, which takes place in any business, but to be able to move more of that work away from, human support to what will be artificial tools, right? And in doing so, firms will then have to make a decision. Well, do we then repoint talent towards higher value client experience oriented work, or do we run a leaner ship and actually just do more with less? I don't know. That's going to have to, we'll see how that plays out. But I do expect advisory firm economics overall to advance over the coming years. I just don't think it's very, very likely that operating profit margins, in my view, will head north as firms find more and more ways of being able to apply technology more so than what they have now. If we look at some of the data in the US market, there's a recent Schwab study that indicated that there's a very small percentage of firms that are kind of adopting AI, and of those firms that are adopting, they're only really using it for marketing so far. But you've got to imagine that over the next several years, firms will find more and more ways to drive more efficiencies. And I do think we'll see the reshaping of both client growth rates, and we'll see the reshaping of operating profit margins. But we'll just have to, it's an interesting time for sure, and some will adopt faster than others. And I think we'll see a new class of performance in terms of advisory firm performance over the next few years.
And that's a wrap on this roundup episode of Between Meetings 2025. In 2026, we'll return with a whole new collection of thinkers, guests, ideas, and conversations for you to enjoy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Between Meetings. For more episodes and to subscribe to our series, visit the NetWealth website, iTunes, Spotify, or your favourite listening service. And if you want to contact me or engage or discuss any of the topics raised, please find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or send me a private message. We hope you can tune into the next episode.